Today we're speaking with Nidhi Handa, CEO of LEUNE. Nidhi, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Absolutely. Well, we're thrilled to have you. And, I love starting off all interviews by asking this question. Do you remember the first time you smoked cannabis?
Um, Definitely was in high school in Europe, and it was in some sort of hash format. Um, that's about as good as my memory will serve me. But yeah, I definitely, possibly in Amsterdam or London, and it was not a stigmatic event at all. I grew up in a household with very alternative medicine, Ayurvedic leaning parents. So anything of the earth was very much like not stigmatized or, something to be like afraid of. So yeah.
Awesome. And so, how did you first come into the cannabis industry and know that this is where you wanted to be?
Like all the best things in my life, it was kind of a happy accident. I'm a brand geek and I've spent most of my career working in some capacity with brands, on brands, building brands. And as a consumer, I live in LA, I'd been watching recreational legalization and what was going on with brands, and I was fascinated. I was like super tripped out on going to dispensaries and what that experience was. And I also I didn't understand where the brand thing was going in weed. I was curious why there were no brands that were speaking to me. And I consider myself a valid consumer. And that was really the beginning of it for me. So everything after that really kind of came from this place of what does a brand that speaks to sort of a middle lane consumer look like? And that's how Loon was born.
Nice. And so tell us a little bit about some of the core values of Loon. Social equity is so important in this industry, but what exactly does social equity mean? What does it mean to you? And how does Loon incorporate those values?
Yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, something that me and my team think about every day. And I'll say this, that I think core to the value system of Loon is this idea of leading with kindness and compassion. And that's really the honest truth. Every single member of my team is first and foremost one of the kindest people I've met, one of the most compassionate. We treat each other really nicely. And that, I think, lends itself to the products that we're building, to the way that we communicate, to the social media that we put out, any which way that we're interacting with the consumer. Mission is a really, really big part of the Loon story. I I know that it's starting to sound a little bit trite, but it's a good thing that it does in our industry. Social justice reform, I think, needs to be a priority for anybody who's profiting or benefiting from the legalized version of this industry. We have a very muddied history of cannabis in this country, and we need to take, if not responsibility, we have to acknowledge and be part of, creating a better future. I'm a I think pretty serial perpetual optimist. And I feel like we all need to do it together. And it feels like a privilege to just be part of it or be, welcome to the party.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you faced any pushback, being a minority founded business in the industry? Have there been any hurdles that you needed to conquer in order to really get Loon where you want it to be?
Um, I would say for sure. Being a woman in this industry, being a woman of color in this industry is certainly uh, has not been easy. And I say that comparable to having been in a lot of other industries, entertainment, luxury, which I would say are both like muddied with a lot of misogyny and a lot of, sort of similar things. Cannabis is unique in that we come from, there's such like an interesting intersection of the type of people in this space. And there are some really beautiful common threads that bring us all here. Like you you can't be faint of heart or somebody who's not in some way, shape, or form like holding space for a better future to be part of this. But I also think there's a push pull of, sort of a mindset of fear, like, what's happening? What is this like? Is this industry going to become like some sort of sellout industry? And what are these brands represent? So I think some of the things that I experience as a woman or a woman of color have something to do with that, perhaps. Others just racism, misogyny, sexism. It's a huge part of the industry. I personally have dealt with some pretty crazy, gnarly things. I employ a lot of women. The stories that I hear from the field make my stomach turn. I take a very hard line on, the type of people that we do business with. The same value system that I impose in my own company, I apply the same to our partners. I think that alignment is so important, and maybe it's a little bit hokey, but I think that the joints taste better if they're rolled with love. So it's definitely it's something that we think a lot about at Loon.
Yeah, it's crazy, I mean, when I was younger, hearing about all sexism in the workplace, and it's when I was coming into the working world, I didn't experience it, but as you go on, it's there. And you're like, oh wow, this is really real. And I cringe when I watch shows like Mad Men to think about how it once was. I don't know if you watch the show Mad Men. And
Yeah, yeah,
I just started rewatching it. That's why I bring it up.
yeah,
And I
yeah,
cringe. And I'm like, I cannot believe that this is what people had to go through, what women had to go through, not too long ago. And we're still growing, us as, a culture and a society, we're still moving towards being better. And so on that note, let's talk about mentorship, because this
sure.
industry, there's a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of people that, have a long-standing history with cannabis. They're passionate about the plant. Have you been a mentor, or did you have a mentor coming into this industry? And if so, what was that like? And are you paying that forward to other entrepreneurs?
I really value mentorship in both directions so strongly. My dad is my greatest mentor. I came from an entrepreneurial family, and I think business was in my blood from birth. Like earliest memories of being like a tiny child with like my dad would put mittens on my hands and teach me math so that I wouldn't use my fingers to count. I for sure have like, sort of that mindset indoctrinated in my mind because of him. And there's so many things that he taught me, even in, obviously from other industries, that just stay with me every day. Value system, basics of business, like, things I think about that he would say every single day that I say to my team now, like, when you're in business, and particularly cannabis, this is true, you're in moments where we're in a very interesting industry, in a very interesting moment where there is more demand than there is supply, right? And that's like a basic of business, is when you have that kind of leverage as a company, as a brand, that comes with a lot of responsibility. Because he always would say to me, remember one thing in business: when you're in a situation where you're negotiating with another party or you're in any way interacting, you will be confronted by opportunities where you can win and the other person is getting screwed over. You never want that. If both parties aren't winning, you're both losing, and it will come back around to you. And it sounds so simple, but it's something that I think about so often in this business because it's so true. We have this opportunity to build businesses and to build our industry in a kind, thoughtful way. And it's not just about, the altruism, it's also just building an industry or building a company, thinking about what's, what do we want this to look like? How do we want to, what is the decorum? And that's one of the things that when you asked about being a woman or being a woman of color in this industry, it's something that really struck me early on. There's very little decorum in many, many settings in our industry that, you really wonder, like, why isn't there, like this sort of common decencies, or just in the way that, some people communicate or fail to communicate. These are things that we've created intentionally in other industries. And I think that we all need to remember in this space that we're still in infancy. So creating decorum and creating sort of setting a tone is so critical. So for me, mentorship is like, it's something that I can't imagine my life without the people who've taught me. In cannabis, I've been so lucky to be surrounded by really, really smart, thoughtful people. And I really try to, actively think about always, that cliche of like, make sure you're in a room with three people who are smarter than you. And that's like a pretty good way to make sure you're going to grow. And similarly, I've been personally mentoring for the last 10 years of my life. I've always had a steady roster of three or four people who I'm mentoring in whatever capacity or however I can be helpful. And I now see that, in our industry, I've been part of Ease's Momentum, which is their social equity incubator. And, I will be a mentor in this year's iteration. And I'm really excited for that because there's so many ropes to learn in this industry, how to launch a brand, what are things to think about, how to think about compliance and how to think about marketing and all of these things. It seems like it doesn't need to be so cutthroat. There's so much space for all of us. I truly believe that. So I feel like mentorship is a huge opportunity, and it's exciting to see, that folks in our industry are starting to get really excited about some of these, ways of communicating. I see this in like the WhatsApp groups I'm part of in cannabis, or like the, sort of things I get invited to. There's so much conversation about mentorship. So it's certainly a hot topic.
Right. And I mean, it's an industry, full of entrepreneurs, and it's almost like a canvas, like we're painting history. Cannabis, we don't have, our history was wiped away by propaganda for decades and decades, and we are just now creating history of the industry. So when you spoke about having decorum and holding people accountable, and this isn't going to fly in this industry, and what might a handshake may have worked 20 years ago, but we need to sign a contract now to make this official. So I'm there with you, and we're creating history, and it's very exciting to be a part of it. Let's transition into current politics and events.
Sure.
Obviously we have a new administration in the White House right now. There has been more talk and more momentum about federal legalization now than ever before. What are your thoughts on the current state of the union?
I think that it's so bittersweet to say this, but 2020 and largely the pandemic and the political crisis that we've seen in the last year has really benefited our industry, for a myriad of reasons. I think that we've seen politically, the direct result of that, new states coming online, and positive conversation around federal legalization. But from my perspective, this is all sort of rooted in, I'm a brand person, so I think about a lot about consumer mindset and a lot about stigma, and the greatest challenge for our industry in this like early chapter is getting over the stigma. And what is exciting about what's happening right now to me is just that it's like at lightning speed. The stigma is, and I see it in my personal life with my peers and peers' parents, and the way that people talk about cannabis consumption. And I also see it in the way that our consumers interact with our brand and the way that they think and talk about where and how they want to use cannabis. It's really exciting. So from a political perspective, I, like everybody else, am incredibly optimistic. I'm also a realist. I don't think anything is done or. And by the way, I don't even know what federal legalization really means or looks like. I mean, looking to Canada and seeing what that means doesn't really translate to something that seems possible. There's really no precedent for this, certainly not that I can think of or know of. The way that we operate state by state, the way that, there's obviously some sort of pie in the sky. Oh, wouldn't it be great when things are federally legalized, we could take weed from California and we could, take it to these other places where they just don't have growing conditions that support. But I also know it's not going to be that easy. There's so many complicated, I mean, I know what it's like to run a business here in California and the myriad of challenges that it comes with in a single state, dealing with a very small regulatory agency like So it's exciting, but it's also there's some trepidation in my mind around, I think this is really, it's very complicated and it will take time. But the tone and the general idea that the stigma is being broken so fast, that's super exciting to me. I love that. I love that we, because like you said it so well, that we've had this very like interesting history that was just sort of anesthetized or sanitized for most of us, and we don't, and we're just coming back around now to accepting or being truthful about what really happened. But yet there's still something that needs to happen to get to like sort of like meet that synapse for people, and it's exciting to see that happen quickly. It's exciting to see, over COVID, I've had so many of my friends reach out to me and saying, I think my parents are like taking edibles every single day, or, I saw my dad smoking a joint in the garage or whatever. And it's like, it's really interesting because, these are the same generation of parents who were like, punishing their kids for smoking weed in high school. So it's a really exciting moment, I think, for a lot of people.
Absolutely. And it's almost interesting how some people have come around to the idea once the government has said, no, this is okay, versus being told, no, this is the devil's lettuce. You can't, consume it, and believing that propaganda for so long. And my grandparents are 90 years old, and they came around to the idea of using CBD only in the last couple of years. But before that, they really were against it wholeheartedly. And then once the perception started to change, well, why not? I mean, maybe I can have an alternative to painkillers, or, as we know, cannabis used to be used as, or believed to be, the gateway drug. Now it's seen as the exit drug. It's saving lives. And it's great to have, pioneers like yourself and entrepreneurs in the industry that are help steering it in the right direction. I think in regards to social equity, every state is different, and some have done a great job, some have been very slow to make it to the game. And with federal legalization, we can only hope that social equity will be a major component to it, and that the federal government can look to states and see what they did and expunge records. I mean, anyways, we could go on and on about
Absolutely.
drugs.
It's and it's such an interesting topic, because I think, the part that I get caught in very often is, this moment of helplessness of like, oh my gosh, like, when yeah, we work closely with Last Prisoner Project, and, think and look at and read and consume, and it sometimes can feel so overwhelming to think, oh my God, like how many people's lives have been ruined because of this plant, because this plant has been used in this weaponized way. But then the sort of flip side to that is that there is this beautiful opportunity that we have. We are so lucky to be part of this space and to get to tell the story and build something from the ground up that looks the way that we want it to look, that interacts the way that we want. And, it is a little bit hokey, and I think that it's very often we, as a society, just erred as sort of the sort of lowest common denominator, or the most negative, potential outcome. But I think, this is an opportunity, and if we've learned anything from this year at home that we've all had, is that the collective consciousness is really powerful. When we all put our intention into something together, it's phenomenal what we can do. It's incredible what we can, accomplish. And we have so much history to learn from. This is an opportunity for us to do something good, to set something right, to not make the same mistakes our government has made or our country has made in other ways. And I'm incredibly optimistic that we have a really solid shot of building something we can all be really proud of. So, that's my sort of optimism for the day. But I really try to like sort of lean into that mindset as much as possible.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so tell us, where do you see Loon in the next 5 years? I mean, where's the company going forward? Where do you hope to be at the end of this year, 2021?
The big focus for us right now is growth, SKU growth. We are a multi-vertical brand, meaning, we play in lots of different, we're most interested in what the end consumer is interested in or doesn't even know they're interested in, but perhaps might be. So it's really exciting to interact with consumers or to have a kind of view into these early habits or use cases. When is it appropriate to smoke a joint versus a disposable vape versus roll your own or an edible or whatever it is. And that's really exciting. That's something we spend a lot of time thinking about and talking about. But mechanically speaking, we are expanding out of state. So we're currently a California only brand, but we are going to be expanding out of state this year. And that is exciting and terrifying at the same time. But it's really, I think, just like a phenomenal thing. I remember when, year one of the brand, and I would talk to MSOs or take meetings on like conversations around expanding the brand, and it felt like, how on earth can I possibly do this thing of like, running this company in California and then building a whole other company and running it in a different state. And today I feel really like so held. I have such a fantastic team and would be so, I think it would be so unfair for me to say that like I've somehow like, built or suddenly become ready to do this thing by myself. I feel ready because I have just like the greatest people around me and I trust them and they trust me somehow. And we all have been able to get here. So Loon is on track to being, in my view, we're really interested in catering to a middle lane consumer. I are one of the only brands in California that are selling through to a 50-50 male female consumer, which is really important to me. I feel very passionately about building an ungendered brand. I have pretty strong feelings about keeping consumable products ungendered. I think, as a woman, I think it's why we very often pay the pink tax at the drugstore. And I think, weed, like a lot of other things you consume, should be shared, regardless of who it's with. And it's exciting. Yeah. So we have a lot of cool things going on, and all at the same time of being able to constantly check in on, all right, well, where does this sit with our mission? Where does this sit with, our value system? Where does this sit with, our consumers and what we know about them? So it's a lot of fun, and I think we have a lot of cool things coming in the next, certainly this year. And 5 years seems like forever. I have no idea. Like, will we still be on this planet in 5 years? I don't know. It's more of the existential, like, pandemic speaking now. But
Well, that is really excited. And I'm excited to follow Loon throughout this journey, this year and next year, and to see, to see you guys on the East Coast, honestly, to see you out here in New York.
thank you.
So
Thank you so much.
absolutely, absolutely. So for viewers that are watching, how can they find you? How can they find the brand? If they are in California, maybe they want to go try your products. Can you give us a little information on how to follow up?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Best way to follow us is either our website, which is leune.co. So that's leune.co, or on Instagram. We're Loon Brand on Instagram. And yeah, you can find where to find us. We are statewide on ease, and we're also in 120 dispensaries in California and growing very rapidly. So you can find us pretty easily here in California, and stay tuned for all of the news coming on out of state expansion. And we look forward to seeing the East Coast soon too.